I want to wish you a very welcome to everyone that is participating in this 5th session of the training on mental health and gender-based violence in conflict. And we know that the context that you are working in is very difficult, and we are very pleased that you take your time to spend this 1.5 hours with us. First, I would like to introduce Kristin, who is going to be a part of the team today. She is the one that has been organizing the chat earlier, but now she's also part of the presentators. Kristin, can you say a little bit about yourself?
I hope you can hear me well. I have had the pleasure of working with HHRI on this manual since its last stage. So I am not a clinical psychologist or any professional. I was just interested in helping, and I had the opportunity through my master's studies in health to have a little pilot of this manual. So I tried teaching the manual as a non-professional, and it was a very good experience. It's an excellent product. So that's Kristin Lumen is my name, and that was a little bit about me.
And I'm not a psychologist either. I'm a human geographer, but I've been working in this field for 9 years almost now. So some experience. And I've been following this manual from the very, very first start until now. Very interesting and long travel. I'm the executive director of HHRI, and I'm very happy to be with you today. So today we're going to talk about metaphors, and we're going to talk about the use of metaphors or stories when helping survivors and introducing the story of the butterfly woman. You can see that the use of stories and metaphors can be a good way of talking with survivors about trauma experience and to be a tool to help survivors regain some of their dignity and strength. We will discuss these in detail during the session. We have also received some answers on the Google and they're very extensive. I see that you are using some form of metaphors and stories in the way you're working already. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. During the session with Nora and Doris and Helen, we had discussed different aspects of helping survivors, beginning with stressing the usefulness and importance of working based on human rights principles and of the mental health consequences of violent conflict. We have also talked about the characteristics of a good helper and how to take care of yourself as a helper. Now, we have also talked about trauma and how we can identify trauma reactions and how to stabilize a survivor. And now we will draw upon these insights that we have talked about earlier and try to connect this into the metaphor that we will discuss. During the third session with Doris, there was a question about how metaphors can be used when you're working with survivors, and this is what we'll talk about today. So here we go, the butterfly woman. So what is a metaphor? Therapeutic metaphors are stories or images that convey something that can amaze, inspire, or open the mind. Metaphors can be lenses or windows through which we can understand and make sense of the world. Examples of metaphors can, for instance, be when we talk about cherry on the top of the cake, referring to the final thing that makes something perfect. Or when someone says, her voice is like music to my ear, meaning that when she talks, this will make me happy. What makes metaphors particularly helpful when working with survivors is that they allow us to talk about an experience in general terms. How something usually is and what happened could be invented, and also the persons could be fictional people. You might recall that Mura said, and maybe what you have experienced yourself, that when talking about sexual violence, in almost all culture, it's very difficult. Not almost all culture. I think in every culture it's difficult to talk about sexual violence. It's a taboo and an extremely invasive type of trauma. And therefore many survivors would never, ever in their life talk about this event. And also talking about the traumatic experience in itself is extremely difficult, as it can easily trigger new trauma reactions and take the survivor back to the traumatic experience. When trying to help survivors, the metaphor, in this case, the story about a person that have experienced gender-based violence in conflict, can allow the helper and survivor to talk about the whole trauma experience in a safe and distant way. Rather than talking directly about the experience of the survivor, the story can be used to externalize. It means that to look at something or a situation from the outside. Because the metaphor is distant from what preoccupies the survivor, he or she can relax her conscious mind. And the story helps to draw an outline of what you discuss together, and then you can look at it together from the outside, from a distance. You can examine it, you can talk about it, and try to understand the reaction. So how can we use the metaphor as a tool when we work with the survivor? Metaphor provides useful tools. By using a metaphor, both you and the survivor can assess where he or she is or what she wants from the help, and how far he or she can travel in the therapeutic journey. The survivor can begin to understand what has happened better and use the metaphor to better be of help after contact with the helper has come to an end. In this story about the butterfly woman, we use a single narrative to describe the experience and consequences of gender-based violence. We explain the course that the trauma takes in very generic terms throughout the story of the butterfly woman. It remains a story, but at the same time, it shows what usually happens to a person after extreme stress, and it's clinically accurate. Here is an example of a metaphoric picture by the organization's psychology tools that can be used to explain PTSD. Memories in PTSD are a bit like items stuffed in a messy linen cupboard. Whenever you brush past the cupboard, the door flies open and then items fall out. In other words, whenever you come across a reminder of trauma, when you have flashbacks or intrusive memory and feel intense fear, a typical response is to try to stuff things back into the cupboard and to close the door as quickly as possible. But this just keeps the problem going. Memories are jammed in the cupboard and the door will swing open at the lightest touch. So what could you do? Slowly take things out of the cupboard, examine them carefully, folding them neatly and putting them back in the right place. In this way, memories of the traumatic event find their proper place, and you can find them if you choose to. But they won't come back so often when you don't want them to. So this is a metaphor that can be used to explain, and it's easily to grasp, to see the difference with the messy and the neat cover. I don't know if this makes sense. We will continue to look at it more concretely later in this session. I don't know if you could please take a moment and answer in the chat. I know that some of you have already answered in the Google formula, but please, if you can make some short sentences of examples of metaphors or stories that are used in your community, and maybe please add what the meaning would be of the metaphor. And someone wrote here in the answer, the swing can be used as a metaphor for the instability of the survivor living among feelings of confusion, insecurity, and unsafety. That's a very good metaphor to use. The technique that we will focus on today is storytelling. Research has shown that telling stories can be effective when working with trauma survivors who find it difficult to work directly on their experience because it triggers memories of the trauma and induces anxiety. What we hope is that by using stories and metaphors, survivors can reflect upon their experience without reliving it. The story that we will work with this is about the butterfly woman that you're already familiar. And then I will give the microphone to Christine.
Thank you for tuning in today. Like Elizabeth said, I will continue with the metaphorical story about the events in the life of the butterfly woman, which you've been waiting to hear about. So here you see the butterfly woman. And we will be talking more about the way she looks and her wings as the story starts and progresses. You might have already familiarized yourself with her in your preparation for today's session. Most importantly, as you might have already discovered when you prepped for this session, to have in mind is the fight, flight, and freeze, which you already learned about, or of course probably already know about, but heard Doris talk about in her session. And further, there are 5 focus areas: thoughts, feelings, breathing, heart, and the body. So we will start with the butterfly woman before any trauma. And it's important to start off when she's healthy and safe. Next slide. In order to understand what is taken away from her and what changes when she is assaulted, which will come in the second part of the story. It's also important to know that she has good memories, and this will be something that we touch upon in the last part when you talk about recovery. And it's important that she can connect to these good memories and at a later time. So again, here you see the focus areas. So pay attention again to the thoughts, her feelings, her breathing, heart, and her body, and what happens in these focus areas during the story. Once upon a time, a butterfly woman lived in a small village surrounded by green hills. She loved to sit by the river that ran nearby. She lived in a solid house with her children and her man. They had good and not so good neighbors and slept in peace at night and woke the next morning with a thankful heart. The country was calm and people had enough to eat and drink. The woman had a good heart and a strong body. Her feet walked her long distances and she had clever hands. She often sang, and you could see her washing clothes in the river, walking with a swing to her hips or jiggling her children. Her man was a good person. She felt satisfied and proud. She trusted her life and the people around her most of the time.
When she was sorry for something, she would cry a little and tell herself that it would get better. She wanted to become a wise woman to whom other people could turn for advice in difficult times. The days went on. In her right wing were all the good memories of her life, like the green hillside, the sound of the river she loved, and the fragrance of her favorite flowers. Thinking of the trees and animals made her feel calm. Looking at the house made her feel safe. Memories of her children, growing up year by year, made her proud. She had sad memories, too, of saying goodbye to her friends when she moved to another part of the country, of her mother's sickness and death. All these memories were stored in her wing. They made her feel strong enough to think and feel and live her life. In the left wing, she kept her dreams about the future, and some worries, too, though they weren't too big to handle. Sometimes she dreamed of a new dress and some good shoes to keep the rain out. But her strongest dream was for her children's education. Every month she tried to save some money for their education. She kept all her dreams, worries, plans, and longings in this wing. They made her feel alive and that she had enough control of her life. Every morning she took a deep breath when she woke up, ready to start a new day. And every night before going to sleep, she rested her face for a moment in the palms of her hands, praying and giving thanks for her good life. And as you can see on the picture of the butterfly woman that's up now, we have, with purpose, drawn the ground under her feet and her feet planted solidly on the ground. I like to think of this also as a reference from what we call the grounding exercises, which is to bring someone to the present and calm them or make them feel stronger. This is an image of a strong and calm woman who is present. And in what to us looks like the left side wing, her right side wing, you have the memories of the past. And in what to us looks like the right side wing, which is her left side wing, you have the plans and the dreams for the future. And importantly also, there's a clear image of a strong heart in the middle of her chest. And also the phrase grateful. So this just for short sums up some of the points from the good departure in the butterfly woman story. And we invite you to reflect with us so that we can have a clear point of departure for how a healthy, happy human being feels when we start drawing this photo or this metaphorical image with the person we're talking to. So please feel free to write in the chat, discuss how the butterfly woman values her life, the things she's concerned about and cares about and thinks about, and how she feels, just as a starting point for this session. If you want to relate it to the 5 focus points that we mentioned in the beginning, you can note down thoughts and then short what she's thinking about first. This might seem like an odd task to do, but it is so that we start off the session about this metaphor by practically discussing what is happening in the 5 focus areas. Yes, her life and her feeling can be described as normal. Thoughts directed to future plans. Heart is loving and cherishing the goodness in life. Body is healthy and feelings are graceful. And she cares about her household. She's a proud mother and wife, not ashamed of her body, enjoys her surrounding, and she knows how to heal herself by herself. She cares about her children's futures. She takes everything for granted. Interesting thoughts there. And you can also please reflect upon what represents, I guess, a normal life, as Marion says here, or a good life in your culture. Give some examples of that. We saw here some examples of the normal and the good life in the the context of this butterfly woman, such as safety, food, good food, children. Yeah, so maybe she has a feeling of being lost and loneliness, at the same time proud of what she's doing. So she's able to cope with those feelings. Yes, very good normal reaction. And underneath the picture of the butterfly woman, the drawing, we note safety and solid ground, which are also important concepts for how one should feel in a normal situation when life is good. But we'll move on. And as you may have noticed when you prepared for today's session, okay, hold on, there's another comment. Yes, we take safety for granted when we haven't necessarily experienced feeling truly unsafe. Yes, very good comment. And thank you. Then I would like you to do an exercise with me. As you may have noticed in the manual, if you had a chance to look through it before today's session, it's encouraged to prepare the person you are speaking with and also yourself for a negative turn in the story. So before we turn to the actual trauma in the story, I would like you to do the grounding exercise 7 with me. Grounding exercise 1 is also a good exercise before you do this change in the story. So what I would like you to do is sit or stand. I'm sitting, and we'll do the feeling the weight of your body exercise. And this, as it says in the manual, helps survivors who are frozen or numb to focus on the present. It activates muscles in the torso and legs, which gives a feeling of physical structure. And when we are overwhelmed, our muscles often change from extreme tension to collapse, and they shift from a state of active defense, fight or flight, to submission, and become more than ordinarily relaxed, hypotonic, so you feel weak. When we are in touch with our structure, it's easier to bear feelings and feel strong, and we can contain our experience and manage feelings of being overwhelmed better. So if you'll try this with me, I'll tell you. Close your eyes or keep them open. Start by feeling your feet on the ground, feeling the soles of your feet in connection with the ground. And pause feeling this for about 5 seconds. And then feel the weight of your legs. Feel how they feel against the seat of the chair or something that you're sitting on if you're sitting. And hold this sensation for 5 seconds. And then you can move on to stamping your feet carefully and slowly from the left foot first to the right foot. And stamp left, right, left, right, left, right. Feel your buttocks and your thighs touching the seat if you're sitting. You can stop stamping and just pay attention to the buttocks and thighs. Maybe contract the muscles and hold for 5 seconds. And feel your back against the back of the chair, or contract the muscles in your abdomen, perhaps, if you're standing. And pay attention to how that feels. You straighten the spine. Stay like that and notice if you feel any different. Do you feel more seated if you're sitting? And square your shoulders back. And thank you for participating in the exercise that you did. It's time to move on to the next part of the story now that we've covered the good beginning. And this is an image of how you could draw the butterfly woman metaphor if you were to use it for someone when you want to illustrate going from the previous picture of the butterfly woman, where she was probably standing straight with a big heart and her head high and her feet solidly planted on the ground. And on the one side of her wing, she had the good memories, sunshine, flowers, food, children. And on the other side, she had hopes for the future and dreams, also involving the children and learning, doing these things that one aspires to do when one feels well. And she also felt grateful. And you may also notice that in this image, there is no heart. The heart is asleep. And there's not really a facial expression either on this butterfly woman. And in this image, she's also floating off the ground. It's quite a different image from the happy outset. So this illustrates how the butterfly woman, the metaphor, looks, perhaps, after a trauma. And I will continue the story and hope that you still pay attention to the focus areas of the thoughts and the feelings and the breath, the heart and the body. And you can keep in mind also the fight, flight, freeze reactions, which Doris talked about in her session 3. This part of the story describes the main reactions or survival strategies mentioned here that humans display in a life-threatening event. And I will continue with the story. I hope you're ready. So life was turned upside down. One morning, she went down to the river. Some soldiers found her there. She was filling containers with water. After that day, everything changed. At first, she tried to flee, but she could not escape. The soldiers laughed when they caught her and threw her down in the dust of the riverbank. Then she tried to fight them. Her heart pumped in her chest. Her face became warm. Her arms were stronger than ever before. But they were 4 big men, and they were even more brutal when she tried to fight back, hitting, biting, kicking, scratching, and screaming for help. Their laughter rang in her ears. The smell of their bodies scared her heart to silence. Her legs became as if dead, her hands and arms too. Her face became pale, and it was as though she had lost all her spirit. She heard the sound of the river and the breath of the soldiers. She lost her sight for a moment. It was as if she had left her body or was hiding in her heart. She looked at the soldiers from a distance, watching them do bad things to her. She saw it like a scene in a film. She did not feel anything. It was as if the men were hurting a stranger, though she knew she was the person being hurt. So we'll do the same as after the good departure and think about what the story tells. What's the turning point, reactions that we identify in the 5 focus areas, the main survival strategies, And I hope that you will write in the chat your reflection. We can start with the thoughts. So what happened in the butterfly woman's thoughts? I'll give you a couple of minutes to write your comments. And also, everyone take a deep breath. It's important to do after reading this story. So one comment here, her thoughts became confused, unfocused, scattered, even ambiguous. Also, think about what happened in her heart. Yes, this is in her heart and body. She was terrified and became warmer. Anything else that happened in her body and her heart? Yes, she felt weak. And before she felt weak, she also felt even stronger than before. So these are all these points that you are talking or mentioning now and that have been described in the story are things that you can talk about with a survivor when you are using a metaphor to describe all natural reactions to such an unnatural event. And yes, she became numb, stage not knowing if she's alive or not, lost all her precious moments in her heart. Yes, and she did distance herself from her body mentally as sort of a survival tactic. Disassociation, I believe, is a word that's often used about that. And she first tried to fight, and then, as you've mentioned, also then became numb. That's more of the freeze reaction after she couldn't flee or overcome them. They were too strong. And these are all natural reactions. And her feelings and thoughts became unclear and mixed, yes. It's a very unnatural event. Have you come across, like it says in the reflection section, any such reactions or feelings in survivors that you have helped or talked to? Have you heard of any other reactions when you have talked to survivors? And please comment in the chat. Any other feelings described in the heart? Any other sensations in the body, breathing, thinking? Okay, one survivor mentioned that it was as if breathing underneath water. I can only imagine that that must have been very difficult to breathe. Yes, and another survival mechanism, just to wait till the experience ends. Thank you for your comments. Very good. Okay, and some women normalize the abnormal situations they go through, and as a result, they forget to mention their troubles. So they suppress by troubles, problems that occurred during the event, perhaps. Well, thank you very much. Everyone take a deep breath again. And also encourage someone you're speaking with to take deep breaths every now and then. Because we are a little short on time today and there's very much to say about the butterfly woman and the story, we will have to continue in the triggers and flashbacks. And I hope that you look carefully through the metaphor in the manual when you have time to see what comes in between these parts. And also in those parts, focus on the 5 focus areas and the survival mechanisms. So here's another possible way of drawing the butterfly woman metaphor when you're talking about triggers and flashbacks as a way to try to explain to a survivor the concepts of triggers and flashbacks, which can be a little difficult to understand maybe, but very important in order to help the survivor to be able to get stronger and safer. Yes, recollect what Laura said in her session 3. And so here you still see that the drawing has the unstable ground and also an unstable contact with others, as opposed to the good beginning where you had your feet solidly planted on the ground, or the butterfly woman did, and felt strong and connected to her surroundings. And there's still no facial expression, and the thoughts are still stressed and fragile, and still no heart, and in addition there's alarm. And you can see on the left side for us, so the butterfly woman's right wing, you have door slamming, the smell of sweat, the color of blood as examples of things that can trigger a survivor. And the way we try to explain this with the metaphor, as you can see, there are little arrows going through the wing into the body of the butterfly woman, is to illustrate that these outside factors of door slamming, smells of sweat, these sensations that you hear and you smell and you see, they can penetrate through the memory part of your wing. So this wing on this side is where you keep your memories, and the other side is where you have your thoughts for the future. And by penetrating through the bad memories, they can reach the survivor or the butterfly woman and affect her negatively, and affect, trigger, and re-traumatize her. And also in the wing where she used to have these positive hopes for the future to hold on to and look forward to, there is nothing positive. There's no hope, there's no trust, there's no choice. Control was also an important factor that was mentioned from the outset in the solid beginning of a good life. So there's no control anymore. And we'll go on to the next slide. So here you can describe in an illustrated way, if you choose to use the butterfly woman, how fear can look and physically when you draw it, and how they can feel threatened in their body by things that are outside that they see and hear. And particularly, it can be hard to, for others, as you might know, and also for the survivor, to connect what's happening as an actual trigger, because it's a normal thing, which now leads to a remembrance and a being back in the situation of the trauma, also then called a trauma reminder. And it's very powerful to experience this. And some even feel that the traumatic event is happening all over again, that they're right in the trauma. And it can happen from something as little as a door slamming, a very normal thing to happen in everyday life. I see a comment here. Yeah, and this is an interesting, sorry, I'm going to just comment on the chat here. The butterfly is considered a fragile creature that follows the light and eventually gets burned by it. Isn't this a very easy to break down picture for a woman to picture herself? And this is a very interesting comment, because one of the most important things about a metaphor is that it has to work. Otherwise, it can, worst case scenario, make things even worse if it doesn't work. So if this is the butterfly following the light and getting burned by it, if that's a used metaphor in the culture that the survivor you're talking with lives in, then maybe, I don't know if it helps to discuss this beforehand and you can still use the butterfly, or if you have to use an entirely different metaphor. The most important thing for any metaphor is to always make sure that it is understood in the way that you intend it to be understood. Otherwise, it can make the situation worse if it is understood as something that is fragile to begin with. Yeah.
Can I just say that this has been discussed many times, and some people have mentioned exactly the same thing, while others have said that maybe you can look at the transformation of the butterfly from something that is like a larva that turns into a butterfly. And you can also look at it through the butterfly transformation process as something useful. I don't know, but as Kristen said, it's important to have a metaphor that works.
Yes.
Give sense in that setting.
It must not give a negative associations when you talk about the metaphor, because that will distract from the therapeutic purpose of using the metaphor. Because this metaphor is supposed to be clinically accurate, so it is supposed to be something that you can rely on to help focus on the survival mechanisms that are normal to people when they're in abnormal situations, and to help focus on what happens in the body and with the thoughts and the heart, so that the survivor can understand what's going on. And it's absolutely essential then that the metaphor you use does not undermine or confuse these focus points and the things you are trying to explain to the survivor and talk about. So it's up to the context, country context. For ugly insects to a beautiful butterfly. Okay. Yes, this is absolutely important, because context is everything. So that's why it's you are encouraged to, when you use metaphors, it says so in the manual also. The most important thing is that you make the metaphor your own and that it works with the survivor that you are using it with. And this is a long process. So you can find something that you think will work in your culture and with the survivor that you're talking with. The most important thing is to use the focus areas and explain the survival mechanisms, and just, it does say in the manual when you look at it and use it how to make sure that you still get the points of departure that you need to have for it to be therapeutic, even if you change the metaphor entirely. Yes. And as mentioned, for the survivor, you might already be very familiar with the term empowering. It is supposed to be an empowering story to convey to the survivor through the metaphor that all the reactions that seem strange and crazy and completely wrong, and maybe you're ashamed of the reactions, that these are all normal reactions to this horrible event that happens. So it's very important to convey that understanding, which I'm sure you're already doing excellently. And you use the triggering and the flashback butterfly metaphor to prepare the survivor for things that you think might be triggering. And here it's important to also recollect what you learned in session 4 about stabilization exercises, and how it's very important to do those stabilization exercises with the survivor and also yourself when you aren't acutely triggered or in a very aroused state, so that if you do them when things are a little calmer, a little better, it might be easier to use them when the situation is very intense. So Again, for this part of the story, do keep in mind the survival mechanisms, the fight, flight, and freeze responses, and the 5 focus areas. So we'll mention them again: the thoughts and the feelings and the breath and the heart and the body of the butterfly woman in this story. Soon after she arrived at the health center, the butterfly woman had to go to the hospital because she had suffered injuries during the rape. She knew that the nurses and the doctors wanted to heal her, but as soon as she had to lie on the bed and spread her legs to be examined, horrible memories from the rape returned. Suddenly, she thought the doctor was a soldier who had raped her. She tried to flee. The memories flooded through her thoughts and body, and she could not separate them from what was happening to her now at the hospital. A wise nurse repeated the butterfly woman's name over and over again in a calm and strong voice. She said, "You are in the hospital now. You are safe now. It is Wednesday, March 12th, 2014. We are here to help you." The tone of her voice was what she said helped the butterfly woman to return to the present. She realized that she was at the hospital receiving help, and she managed to calm down. The wise nurse understood that the butterfly woman's memories of the rape were very close to the surface and could be triggered during the care she would receive and the examination she would have to undertake. She decided to prepare her for what would happen and explain to her how easily old rape memories can be triggered by reminders. They talked about the woman's reaction during her medical examination the day before. The nurse suggested exercises the woman could do to prevent old memories from flooding her mind. She taught the butterfly woman to use her eyes, to look at things around her, and to say aloud to herself what she was seeing. When she did this, the woman noticed that she felt more present, more in the here and now. The wise nurse said, "When you focus on the present, the past stays in the past." The butterfly woman also learned to ground herself by using her sense of touch. She held a stone that just fitted in her hand and felt its weight, its coolness, its shape. The two women practiced these exercises together, and the nurse told the butterfly woman to do them whenever she felt her memories coming back. The nurse also said that she would remain during her operation to reassure the butterfly woman and remind her that the hospital was safe. Yeah. So, as with the previous two sections, I invite you to take a deep breath and write your reflections in the chat column. You can base them on your own experience working with survivors. What are some of the triggers or the activators of bad memories that you have heard about? You are also free to write your thoughts about why bad memories are activated and what helps survivors to cope. And we have had, I can mention, some discussions about, for example, on the last point of what helps a survivor to cope. This exact story where a rock is used for the sense of touch, we have discussed that maybe the rock itself can be a trigger, and all these things are issues to consider when you are with a survivor. So I hope you write some experiences that you've had regarding triggers and why re-traumatization happens and what can help the survivor cope. I'll give you a few minutes. Also reflect, if you like, on whether or not you have in your work encountered someone who has been clearly reactivated or triggered. Maybe they're even experiencing their trauma all over again. So one comment here. So one survivor's memories were triggered by darkness. And you need to say here that you, the helper for her parents, wouldn't allow her to. Can you explain maybe what you mean here? Re-traumatizes the woman. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Nadine, if I understand you right, darkness was one of her triggers, but you were not allowed to help her deal with that trigger. You were just supposed to help her during a medical situation. Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, I hope, to Nadine, that that maybe the manual can aid you in your effort to help her. Yes, because of parents' issues. Yes, and it's sad that not everyone understands how important it is to deal with the triggers and the possible the things that can re-traumatize a person. Good, good. And from Melissa, making a survivor tell her story over and over again re-traumatizes the woman. Yes, that's an awful occurrence and shows a complete lack of understanding in the system when a person constantly has to retell the story. I'm guessing if it's someone you are working with over time, you can definitely work with them on trying to prepare them to have to tell their story, right? And as with the metaphor can also be made, or the story can be made very, I don't want to say vague, but lack the bad details when you try to explain how a traumatizing event is, especially if you're talking with someone who's very easily re-traumatized by talking about the trauma event. So I don't know, I guess it totally depends on the agency, but one can maybe try to practice with the survivor how to tell the story without much detail, even though I understand that that can be hard to do. And then Sahed, I think that the helper should try to calm her down in an indirect way and also do medical diagnosis. Can you explain a little bit what you think here, Sahed? And I see Kativ says the examination of her body by the doctor. Yes, absolutely, a traumatizing event. Oh yeah, so a specialist should do the diagnosis. Someone, are you thinking about someone who knows about trauma when you say a specialist? Because that would be the ideal thing, is if the people who did any kind of medical examination were very familiar with trauma and how to handle the situation and be around a survivor. Yes.
And I've also heard Nora talking about preparing, like this nurse was doing in the story. She was preparing the survivor for the actual event of going to the doctor, that they knew that maybe this was going to be a trigger, and how can we prepare? Maybe we can have this.
It's like, yeah, it's like what Melissa is mentioning here, keeping the survivor in the present and building trust, as the wise nurse did in the story. Yes, that's absolutely something that can be done. And the manual does cover some steps that you can use to help prepare with a survivor for such an examination. In the case that you as a supporter can be there, or in the case where they have to go by themselves. Thank you for your comments and discussion. And I think we can move on to the gradual healing part, which is something we touched upon a little bit now when we touched upon preparing a survivor to meet or deal with possible triggers. That is a start on the path to gradual healing. You see here a possible image of the butterfly woman that you can draw when you try to explain the gradual healing process. What is completely new on this drawing as opposed to the others, I don't know if you noticed right away, but this butterfly woman has the antennas that butterflies have. And that's to symbolize the senses, so sensory activity, where you reach out and, for instance, in the story, the butterfly woman was given a stone to touch and activate her senses and bring her to the present through the stone. So these antennas are used to reconnect with memories from the past and wake up at those longings for the future. And you still have the body represented with the ground as a symbol, and here the feet have started touching the ground, and it says grounding, and that's because all the grounding exercises can be very useful and helpful when you try to gradually get back to normal and regain some of the good memories and the good feelings. You see that there's still trauma memories and there's still chaos, but out there, there are things that you can try to bring back into the wings and to the body through the senses. So you have on the left side the memories of good food and the smell of flowers and happiness, and on the right side the aspirations to, it says, to be, to belong, to want, knowing that you can, that you have survived all these good thoughts that can go into the other wing where there's currently chaos and darkness. So
let's just say that this is why it's so important in the beginning to establish a good life.
yeah, because that's what you want to try to reconnect with. So that's what this story is about also, is reconnecting with the good past, showing that it's possible maybe not to have the same, but to bring back some of the good from the past. So we will move on with the gradual healing. In the manual, there are so many good exercises, which is what's so good about it, and there are also recovery exercises. That's particularly for this part of the story. We refer you to some pages further down. So here this part of the story is supposed to describe that through managing traumatic memories, because they will occur, you can use the tools, the grounding exercises, use what you know about the window of tolerance, psychoeducation, that through those, a survivor can be helped to identify and manage, and eventually to weaken the effects of traumatic memories. And in that sense, we expand the window of tolerance again and be more stable, not so easily triggered or not so heavily triggered. And we refer you here in the study to pages 84 to 95 to look at some of the recovery skills that we unfortunately don't have time to go through in today's session. And in this way, through helping the survivor through these steps, the survivor will be able to focus on other things and thoughts than the trauma and to recreate, as we mentioned, the good memories from the past. And she needs to recreate some good memories to create some other good memories and some hopes for the future. And this allows the survivor to build new hope, yes, to recall old plans and longings, find new dreams. And like I said earlier, the metaphor we use here to symbolize how she can go about doing this is the antenna. That's the symbolic reference in this progress, or this process. And it's, like I said, mentioned in the recovery tools section, how you can actually, in practice, use these antennas. And so the butterfly woman here wakes up good memories and old resources in this part of the story, and good new experiences waken her dreams and longings for the future. So like in the previous sections of the story, I want you to keep in mind the survival mechanisms, fight, flight, and freeze, and the 5 focus areas of the thoughts and the feelings, the breathing, the heart, and the body. Yeah. So the helper explained to the butterfly woman, on page 85, that she needed to find ways to reconnect herself and to relocate herself in the here and now. The helper said, if you focus on the present moment, memories of the past will remain in the past. The butterfly woman found it hard to understand what this meant. And the helper said, memory of the rake can invade the present, taking away your sense of time and place. She explained that the trauma memories belong to time past. The secret is to experience the present through our senses. This anchors us to the here and now. The helper put hot tea and 2 cups on the table in front of them. She said, listen, what do you hear? Then she poured tea into the cup. The butterfly woman listened, paused, and said that she heard the sound of the water pouring, a bird singing, and the voices of some of the women outside. The helper replied, you have now focused your hearing. These sounds tell you what is happening right now. This is how you connect yourself to the present moment, by using your ears. Now hold the cup and use your sense of touch. Feel the cup. The butterfly woman could feel its warmth. Then they used their sense of taste to savor the tea. The butterfly woman could taste and smell the tea. The helper asked, what happened to your memories when we concentrated on hearing sounds, touching the cups, and tasting the tea? The butterfly woman replied that they were absent. The helper praised the butterfly woman's good work. She said that our senses are gateways that connect us to the present. When we focus our senses on what we are seeing, hearing, tasting, and touching, what we feel becomes our reality. So it is important to open our senses and focus our attention on things that remind us that we are safe, that now and here we are safe. We call this a grounding exercise because it gives us ways to ground ourselves in the present moment. we will move on to some reflections like we have previously about this section in the story. And I invite you to write in the chat. We have showed here that the butterfly woman used tools to regulate her reactions. And please, can you give some examples of different situations where learned tools, like how she was taught to listen to what she could hear in the present, situations where you have been presented with learned tools and how they can be effective to regulate the reactions of the survivor. So please write in the chat what you have experienced. And if you have any questions, write that off. Elizabeth is telling me here a reply she got regarding tools for triggers that we were talking about earlier. And I guess the person who was scared of the dark, in the comments that she received by email, you had helped her by saying she should have a flashlight to light up in the darkness when you were talking via the telephone, which is a very good idea. And I see a comment that came in earlier. The doctor should know how they can deal with this case if there is no psychologist during the examination. Yeah. Ideally, everyone in touch with a survivor should know how to deal with the survivor. Yes, another comment here. A survivor held a torch when she fell asleep because she was triggered by darkness and there was no electricity. Yeah, okay, I see. That was what we were talking about. I'll give you a couple more minutes. The section of the story headlined using the recovery skills that I just read from the Butterfly Woman. I don't know if you heard through the story the metaphor in use, the metaphor of the antennas. That is the metaphor of using the senses to orientate to the present, maybe remember how tea tastes and smells, other good memories that you used to have before the trauma happened. That is what the drawing with the antenna tries to illustrate. So have any of you used any similar tactics when talking to the survivors as this woman did, where she poured tea and asked the butterfly woman to listen to the sound of it, to smell the tea and taste the tea? Maybe something that is culturally relevant to you. This is an interesting comment from Megan. The smell of gunpowder would initiate asthma stress and hard breathing difficulties, so the technique used was baby lotion. So the survivor could smell baby lotion to help them breathe normally again. Very interesting. Okay, I think we can move on. If you have any last words, please write them. We will move on to a very essential part of using metaphorical stories, and that is the good ending. Because of course we want to convey to survivors that there can be a good ending. especially when it feels the least like this is possible. That's for the next session. And I hope that you found the session somewhat helpful. We hope you ask us questions if you have any. We will try to answer. The manual is great help. We did have to, someone needs to mute their microphone. Hello? Whoever has not muted their microphone? Mahmoud, I think? Is Mahmoud there? Or Yahya?
It's open from Yahya's side. Yahya, can I ask please to turn off your mic?
Yahya, can you turn off your mic, please?
Yahya Yazdi, can I ask you please to turn off your mic? Thank you.
Unless you have questions. Thank you for following this session. Lisa would like to say something now before we open up for questions.
Welcome. Yeah, I can just mention that the next 2 sessions will be in one time. So Nora will do the last 2 sessions in one time because of time. She's a very busy woman and she's doing a lot of traveling for her duty. And hopefully we will manage to have a session on Monday the 26th. I hope you can join us. I'll send you some more information about that. And for those who cannot join us on Monday, we will do the recording and you will be able to see the recording, and we will eventually have another session where you can ask final questions if you don't manage to join us in this session on Monday the 26th. But Nora will do the recording part, which is a very essential part of working with a survivor for many people. Recording if it's to the police.
I'm sorry,
or
can I ask you please either
other
your
type
mic
of
or
officials.
mic because we have an error.
So that's very important, and also what Christian said.
We have an echo.
Finding a good ending to the story. So thank you so much. Yes. Did you have any chats that you wanted to reply to?
Yes. Thank you so much for following the session about the Butterfly Woman metaphor story today. Like I said, there's a bunch more about this in the manual. You probably already saw this. I do hope that you find it useful in your work, and just familiarize yourself with the most important points of departure and the essential points to pay attention to in the story, and then you can pretty much rewrite the story into any metaphor that you deem the most appropriate and